The office was a cavern of silence, pierced only by the low, steady hum of the fluorescent lights hanging overhead. Jenna moved carefully through the rows of empty desks, her footsteps muffled against the cold, worn carpet. It was well past midnight, and the world outside seemed to have slipped into a deep, unforgiving sleep. But here, inside these walls, the night was far from peaceful. She rubbed her arms, the chill in the air more than just the building's failing heat. Her fingers grazed the edges of scattered papers as she tidied up, the dull buzz of the lights seeming to grow louder, filling the space around her. The quiet was so complete that it pressed against her ears, until a faint, almost imperceptible whisper broke the stillness. At first, Jenna thought it was the wind sneaking through the cracked window, or maybe her own imagination playing tricks on her after hours of solitude. The whisper was soft, so delicate she had to strain to catch it. Then she paused, heart quickening. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a voice, calling her name, quietly, urgently. Jenna, her breath caught in her throat. She scanned the room, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, but the empty desks stared back at her like ghostly sentinels. No one else was here. She told herself it was a prank, maybe a co-worker hiding somewhere, waiting to jump out and startle her. But as she moved from cubicle to cubicle, her voice searching the empty halls, there was no reply. No laughter, no footsteps. The whispers grew louder, twisting through the air like tendrils of cold mist, circling her with words only half heard. Yet, whenever she turned to look, the space was vacant. No sign of anyone or anything, just the flickering shadows cast by the unsteady fluorescent bulbs. Jenna's pulse hammered in her ears as the unsettling feeling settled in. She was not alone. But whatever was with her, it wasn't something she could see. The whispers no longer lingered at the edge of Jenna's hearing. They spilled into the silence, thick and heavy, curling around her like smoke. They slithered down the empty hallways and brushed past the cold walls, growing louder with every passing moment. The gentle, almost hesitant voice that had called her name before was now a chorus. Multiple whispers overlapping, whispering not just her name, but words she couldn't quite understand. The air itself seemed to pulse with the sound, and then came the footsteps. Soft, distant, echoing hollowly down the tiled corridors. Jenna froze, every nerve screaming. Her breath hitched, sharp and shallow. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the building was silent again, suffocating in its stillness, as if it was holding its breath. Then they came again, closer this time, each step measured, deliberate, but no one appeared. The halls were as empty as before, no figures darting in or out of view. Just the echo of footsteps that vanished before they reached her. Her heart pounding, Jenna stumbled toward the security room. The dim glow of monitors cast eerie shadows on the walls, the flickering images like ghostly eyes watching her back. She frantically toggled between camera feeds. The reception, the conference rooms, the stairwells, every corner of the building lay deserted. Not a single sign of life. And yet she could still hear it. That breath, a ragged, desperate exhale, as close as if someone was standing right behind her. Jenna spun around with a strangled cry, eyes wild, but the space was empty. The cold weight of nothingness pressed against her back. The air where the breath had been was stale, untouched. Her skin prickled, goosebumps spreading down her arms. She tried to steady her shaking hands, pulling out her phone to call for help. But the screen remained dark. No signal, no calls, no messages, nothing. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights overhead began to flicker erratically, bathing the office in stuttering bursts of light and shadow. Each flash distorted the shapes around her, walls stretching impossibly long, chairs twisting into grotesque silhouettes. The shadows grew thick and heavy, creeping along the floor like living things. Jenna's eyes darted nervously to the corners of the room, where darkness pooled deeper than it should. Shapes shimmered just beyond sight, shifting and coiling. She could almost feel them pressing closer, as if the very shadows were alive, hungry, watching. Her breath came faster now, shallow and ragged. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape the creeping dread that filled the air. But the building felt like a trap, its corridors folding inwards, closing the exits she knew so well. Another whisper floated past her ear, colder and sharper this time. Jenna! The voice wasn't pleading anymore. It was demanding. Frozen in place, Jenna's vision blurred with tears as panic welled up inside her. The silence shattered with a sudden, piercing screech, a high, agonized wail that echoed through the empty halls, shaking the walls. She stumbled back toward the door, only to find it slammed shut, locking tight with a chilling finality. The flickering lights dimmed to near darkness, leaving her surrounded by oppressive blackness and the unrelenting whispers that promised she wasn't alone. Not really. Jenna's eyes darted wildly, scanning the dim corners of the office where the flickering lights barely reached. That's when she saw it, something moving in the shadows. Not the usual play of light or a trick of her tired mind, but a shape, dark and shifting, independent of any light source. It slithered just beyond her peripheral vision, a black smear that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Her heart slammed against her ribs as a cold dread rooted her to the spot. The whispering voices turned into silent screams inside her head, and every instinct screamed at her to run. But the figure, no, the thing, moved closer, gliding without sound, bending the darkness around it like a cloak. Panic surged like a flood, and Jenna sprinted toward the storage room. The door was cold and unforgiving as she slammed it shut behind her, fumbling for the lock. Her hands shook uncontrollably, the key rattling against the metal as she secured herself inside. The faint hum of the building seemed miles away now, replaced by an oppressive silence. But silence was a lie. From somewhere just beyond the thin walls, the shadows stirred. Soft, deliberate movements, like something pacing or watching. Jenna pressed herself against the cold wall, eyes wide in the dim emergency light. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale colder than the last. Then a slow creak echoed through the room, wood shifting, or maybe something else entirely. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. Outside the storage door, the shadows seemed to writhe, stretching longer and darker, pooling into shapes too vague to describe but too menacing to ignore. Jenna's fingers curled into fists as the tension crushed her chest. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever, but for now she waited. Every second stretched endlessly, filled with the terrible promise of what lurked just beyond the walls, watching, waiting. When the morning shift workers finally arrived, they found Jenna trembling in the storage room, her eyes wild, her voice trembling as she recounted the horrors she had faced. The whispers, the footsteps, the breath behind her, the flickering shadows that moved of their own accord. But the real terror revealed itself in the security footage. The video showed the entire night, every corridor, and every room Jenna had walked through. It revealed one impossible truth: the building was utterly empty. Not a single other person stepped foot inside during her shift. Jenna had truly been alone. And yet, in every frame where Jenna appeared, a dark, formless shadow loomed silently behind her. Never moving, never making a sound, but always there. Watching. No one could explain it. No one wanted to believe it. The shadow never stepped forward. It never made a noise. But the moment Jenna turned around, it was gone, vanishing into the empty air, as if it was never there at all. Whatever haunted those halls didn't need to be seen to be terrifying. It was always watching, always waiting. The office was swallowed by darkness as the night deepened. James sat alone at his desk, the glow from his computer screen the only light cutting through the thick silence. Outside, the city's pulse had slowed to a distant heartbeat, but inside the sterile tech company, time felt frozen, stretched thin by the weight of isolation. The hum of machines and the faint flicker of monitors were the only companions for this graveyard shift. Hours of coding had turned his eyes heavy and his thoughts sluggish. The walls, lined with glass and metal, felt like they were closing in, an invisible pressure squeezing the air from the room. James rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the exhaustion, and reached for his coffee cup, now cold and bitter. Then faintly he heard it, the gentle tapping of keys. At first, he thought it was his own fingers dancing clumsily over the keyboard. But as he looked up, the tapping continued, soft, deliberate, and coming from his computer itself. The keys clicked in a slow, steady rhythm. A glitch, he told himself, a software hiccup. Probably a stuck key, or an errant program running in the background. James sighed and turned back to his screen, forcing his mind to focus. But the tapping persisted, unnerving in its mechanical precision. The oppressive silence of the empty office pressed in around him, and for a moment, a cold shiver traced his spine. Yet, he told himself it was nothing. Just a glitch. Just the night playing tricks. The tapping soon morphed from random clicks to something far more purposeful. A full-blown rhythm, deliberate and unmistakable. James froze, staring as the keyboard seemed to come alive, fingers typing in a code he didn't recognize. Lines of cryptic characters spilled across the screen, scrolling faster than he could follow. He reached out to shut down the system, but the power button refused to respond. The monitor flickered, refusing to turn off. Panic prickled at the edges of his mind. Then, without warning, a new file appeared on the desktop, blinking insistently. The title, Help_me. His pulse quickened. Hesitating, James double-clicked the file. The screen filled with a message typed out in jagged letters. Look behind you. A cold wave washed over him. James slowly turned his head, heart hammering in his chest, but the office remained bathed in shadows. Nothing stirred. The room was empty. The silence was suffocating. And yet, the tapping on the keyboard continued, louder now, like a frantic heartbeat echoing through the stillness. Something was in the room with him. Something watching, something waiting. The message burned in James's mind as he slowly twisted in his chair, eyes wide and desperate. Look behind you. His heart pounded so hard, he feared it might burst from his chest. But when he turned, the room remained cloaked in darkness, illuminated only by the cold, flickering glow of his monitor. Shadows swallowed the corners of the office, and the silence pressed in so thick it felt like the walls themselves were closing around him. Yet the tapping did not stop. It grew louder, more frantic, more insistent, as if the very keys beneath his fingers were being hammered by an unseen force. His breath hitched, cold sweat tracing down his back. The chair beneath him suddenly began to move, rolling backward slowly, eerily without anyone touching it. James lurched forward, trying to grab it, but it slipped through his fingers as if pulled by invisible hands. Panic clawed at his throat. He sprang to his feet, heart racing wildly, and moved toward the exit. But as he reached for the door handle, a sharp click echoed through the silence. The door locked itself with an unforgiving finality. He rattled the handle, banging against the cold metal, but it wouldn't budge. His eyes darted around, searching for another way out, a window, anything. But the familiar office had twisted into something unrecognizable. The walls seemed to stretch and shift, corridors elongating, folding into themselves like a nightmare maze. The layout he knew so well warped into a labyrinth designed to trap him. With every step, the tapping on his keyboard echoed louder, like a heartbeat syncing with his terror. The building itself seemed alive, mocking his attempts to escape. The lights flickered wildly, throwing grotesque shadows that danced just beyond his sight. James realized with a sinking horror that he was no longer just a man working late. He was a prisoner, lost in a place that was not entirely real, trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. And whatever was behind the tapping was closing in. When the first rays of dawn crept through the office windows, the morning shift arrived to an unnerving scene. James was found slumped over his desk, unmoving, his skin pale as the harsh fluorescent light that flickered overhead. His fingers still rested lightly on the keyboard, frozen mid-gesture as if caught between worlds. The computer screen glowed softly, displaying one final, chilling message in stark, jagged letters. You shouldn't have ignored us. The words seemed to hang in the stale morning air, heavy with a warning and a silent threat. The authorities and security personnel scoured the footage to understand what had happened during the night. The cameras revealed a haunting truth that no one could explain. James wasn't alone, but there was no visible figure beside him, no intruder, no shadowy presence. Yet the recordings showed James speaking, whispering, arguing, even pleading with someone unseen. The voices weren't coming from any device or person. Instead, they seemed to seep from the very walls themselves, soft, distorted murmurs echoing through the empty corridors like ancient whispers carried on the wind. The cameras caught the subtle shifting of air around him, like an invisible presence moving just out of sight. Witnesses who reviewed the footage said James's expressions twisted from confusion to terror, as if trapped in a conversation with something that defied reality. No one could hear the voices, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. When the night shift ended, James hadn't just been working late. He'd been drawn into something older and darker, a force that lurked beneath the surface of the building itself, waiting patiently for someone foolish enough to ignore its warning. And in that final message on the screen lay a truth no one dared to forget. Some things don't just watch you from the shadows, they wait for you to hear them. And if you don't listen, they come for you. The old office building stood like a forgotten relic against the night sky, its windows dark and hollow like vacant eyes staring into the abyss. Nathan pulled his coat tighter around himself as he pushed open the heavy glass doors, the faint scent of dust and something far older curling in the stale air. The faded linoleum floors creaked beneath his boots as he stepped inside, the echoes swallowing his footsteps like whispers lost in time. This building had a reputation. Whispered rumors passed down among employees about strange noises, unexplained shadows, and an unease that settled deep into the bones of anyone who worked the late shift. But Nathan wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. Haunted or not, this was just another job, another night spent staring at screens and shuffling papers until dawn. He made his way to his office on the 3rd floor, the fluorescent lights above flickering briefly as he settled in. The quick stutter of light was almost imperceptible, like the flutter of a dying heartbeat. Nathan shrugged it off. Old buildings had old wiring, after all, nothing more than a minor power glitch. The quiet was thick, heavy like a blanket pressed too tightly. Only a few other night workers dotted the floors above and below, but their presence was barely felt. The stillness seemed to cling to Nathan, pressing in through the cracked windows and settling in the corners of the room. He flicked on his desk lamp, the warm glow cutting through the shadows. Yet even as the light spread, the darkness seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Nathan sat down, drawing his chair closer to the desk. The silence was almost comforting at first, but beneath it lay something else, a tension, a feeling that he was no longer alone, that something unseen watched from the edges of his vision. For now, the flickering light was just a flicker, but Nathan couldn't shake the creeping sensation that the night was far from over, and that the building's secrets were just beginning to stir. The flickering of the lights, once a brief annoyance, now pulsed with a frantic urgency. The fluorescent bulbs overhead buzzed and sparked, casting erratic shadows that danced and twisted across the cracked walls. A faint electrical crackle hummed through the air, a sharp, static-laced sound that gnawed at the edges of Nathan's nerves. It was as if the very wiring in the building was alive, thrumming with some restless, malevolent energy. The silence fractured by distant creaks and groans, the building settling, or something far more sinister shifting within its bones. The heavy metal doors along the hallway moaned open and shut with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as though pushed by invisible hands. Then came the laughter, faint, echoing, playful yet twisted. It floated on the stale air, slipping through the vents and wrapping around Nathan like a cold, mocking embrace. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but curiosity rooted him to the spot. He forced himself to stand, his footsteps tentative and uneven as he began to move through the darkened floor. Each step was swallowed by the thick silence, broken only by the irregular flicker of dying lights. The deeper he ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the shadows themselves were watching, waiting. Descending the stairs to the basement, Nathan felt the temperature drop sharply. The darkness here was different, thicker, heavier, swallowing the faint beam of his flashlight. The hum of electricity faded into silence, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed down on his chest. His breath came shallow and quick. Then, from the edges of his vision, shapes began to emerge, shadowy figures flickering in and out of sight. They moved with unnatural grace, gliding through the darkness like smoke, their forms indistinct but undeniably human. Faces blurred and twisted, features shifting like smoke caught in a cold wind. The laughter grew louder, more frenzied, echoing off the concrete walls as the shadows circled Nathan, closing in with slow, deliberate intent. The cold fingers of dread wrapped around him, and he realized he was no longer alone in the darkness. Something ancient and hungry had been waiting for him all along. The shadows thickened around Nathan like a living fog, swirling and curling with unnatural purpose. Their edges blurred and wavered as if caught between worlds, neither fully here nor gone. From their depths came whispers, soft, urgent, and maddeningly unintelligible. The voices wove together in a dissonant chorus, speaking in languages long lost to time, their meaning buried beneath layers of darkness and dread. It was a sound that burrowed into the mind, scraping at sanity with invisible claws. Nathan's breath hitched, his heart pounding in his chest as the figures closed in. Their faces began to twist and contort, melting from vague shadows into grotesque visages that seemed ripped from nightmares. Eyes sunken and hollow, mouths stretched in silent screams, and features warped as if reflecting some unspeakable torment. They leaned closer, their twisted expressions filled with a hunger that pierced the cold air. Desperation surged through Nathan as he turned to flee, but the basement door slammed shut with a bone-jarring thud. He lunged toward it, pounding on the cold metal, but the door wouldn't budge. It was jammed, locked by some invisible force. Panic clawed at his throat, thick and suffocating. He stumbled back into the darkness, the shadowy figures closing the circle around him. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the cold seeping into his bones as the whispers rose in intensity. They spoke faster now, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of forgotten curses and broken prayers. Nathan's vision blurred, every instinct screaming that he was trapped, caught in a nightmare with no escape. The shadows pressed closer, their twisted faces mere inches from his own, and the last shred of hope drained from his eyes. In that suffocating darkness, surrounded by things no human was meant to see, Nathan was lost. When the morning shift arrived, the office was eerily pristine. Every desk untouched, every paper in place, as if the night had passed without incident. The only sign that something was wrong was the relentless flickering of the overhead lights, casting long, jittery shadows that danced across the walls like restless spirits refusing to settle. The janitor, an old man with eyes that seemed to have seen too much, shook his head when asked about Nathan. "He vanished," he said quietly, voice heavy with unspoken fear. "Gone without a trace. Never seen him leave. Some say the building took him." Curious, the staff reviewed the security footage, hoping for answers that would ease their growing dread. The grainy video showed Nathan walking purposefully toward the basement entrance, pausing as if drawn by some unseen force. His eyes locked on the dark stairwell below, vacant and unfathomable. Then, in an instant, a sudden flash of blinding light, so bright it momentarily overwhelmed the cameras. When it faded, Nathan was gone. No footsteps retreating, no hurried escapes, just an empty stairwell swallowing the silence. The building returned to its usual quiet after that, but something lingered, an unseen presence in the flickering lights, a breath on the back of anyone who dared to work late. Nathan's disappearance became a whispered warning, a dark secret shared among the few who knew the truth. And somewhere, in the depths below, the shadows wait, waiting for the next soul to wander too far into the darkness. As the shadows settle and the first light of day creeps through the windows, remember this: night shifts are not just about working late. They're about facing the unknown when the world sleeps. When you're alone in those silent halls, surrounded by flickering lights and whispering shadows, the question isn't whether you're truly alone. It's whether whatever's watching is patient enough to wait. What would you do if you found yourself trapped in a place like this? Would you run as fast as your legs could carry you, or would you stay and face the darkness? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Have you ever experienced something you can't explain during a night shift? Share your story, because sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that are real. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a chance to step into the shadows with us. Until next time, keep your lights on and watch your back.